Every client, despite what it might have looked like on the surface, there was this theme of self-hatred, self-criticism, self-judgment, self-rejection. You weren't born hating yourself. You weren't born rejecting yourself. It's something you learned along the way, something you've taken on. We tend to look at symptoms because they're loud and they get our attention. When we're anxious chronically, of course that needs to be attended to. Sometimes that anxiety is being driven by all this anger that we're directing against ourselves that we didn't know how to deal with when we were children, for example. When we're not connected to ourselves, we can't really be connected to other people, and that's what we most want.
Herzlich willkommen zum CERTYCOACH Podcast. Heute mit Dr. Laurence, dem Begründer des so wichtigen NARM Ansatzes. In dieser Episode gehen wir der zentralen Frage nach, warum es vielen Menschen so schwer fällt, wirklichen Kontakt mit ihren Emotionen und damit verbunden auch mit ihren Bedürfnissen zu haben. Denn gerade in einer Zeit, wo häufig gesagt wird, sei nicht zu emotional, ist das natürlich ein großes Thema. Und wir erleben es, immer mehr Menschen haben wirklich Schwierigkeit, sich zu spüren, sich wirklich innerlich selbst wahrzunehmen. Und diese Dynamik hat natürlich Auswirkungen auf unsere Beziehung, beruflich und privat, aber auch auf Coaching und Therapie. Und es ist wichtig, diese Dynamik zu kennen und damit umzugehen, wenn du Leute professionell begleiten möchtest. Und genau darüber sprechen wir in dieser Episode. Das heißt, wenn du Menschen in Veränderungsprozessen begleiten möchtest oder wenn du neugierig bist, wie diese inneren Dynamiken uns oftmals davon abhalten, das zu tun, was wir wirklich wollen, dann bist du hier genau richtig. Und ich würde sagen, komm, lass uns gemeinsam eintauchen.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Larry. I have the great pleasure here to have a little bit of time with you, which is always super valuing and I always appreciate because I know you're very busy. You are the founder of the NARM Training Institute and also the founder of the NARM approach. And we will dive into that and what that means a little bit later on. But yeah, first of all, I really appreciate that you take the time because I know you're a very busy man.
I'm busy, but and thank you. I appreciate your warm welcome here.
Yeah, and I think sort of we share a desire. We share the desire of supporting people to help other people to support them, and I think it's very important in this time. And so I would like to kind of start with the question and posing the question, sort of, how did we lose our aliveness in a way? I think, when we enter this world and everything goes like roughly normal, we're so alive. And then when we're kids, we're so alive, but it seems that at some point we kind of, we lose it. And if we look into like numbers like depression, burnout, all these things, it looks alarming. So how does that happen? What goes wrong on the way?
Well, what you're describing, there's a fairly large range in there because losing aliveness is something I think that every child experiences. We can talk about some of the details of that, but then on the more becoming symptomatic, like with chronic anxiety or chronic depression or CPTSD, those kinds of things, that's getting into a different area. Sometimes it's a question of degree, but there are also specific kinds of dynamic that go into chronic depression, which is often a symptom of CPTSD or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, as the World Health Organization defines it now. So and you and I can, kind of explore that spectrum because there is just this basic dynamic that every child that is born on this planet, unless there's been previous in utero trauma or physical difficulties, but every healthy child, relatively at least healthy child, tends to be more alive than the parents that bring them into the world. It's just the way things are. It's one of the things that people, those of us who like children, really respond to: the openness, the aliveness, the curiosity that hasn't yet been crushed or diminished by various systems. And so those could be family systems, because sometimes, again, all the difficulties going on in a family, but they can also be educational systems, which aren't always geared to support children in their fullness and in their aliveness. There's just difficulties in the world that children don't have to deal with directly, hopefully. I mean, sometimes they have to deal with it directly, depending on where they're born and what their circumstances are. But so there are a number of different elements that go into the fact that over time, children learn to dim their light. They have to shut their aliveness down. It's for a variety of reasons that I just mentioned. So, we again, and we can go deeper into any of those that you want to explore more fully.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very interesting to hear from you. It's the normal way that children are always more alive than their parents. I think I've never thought about it that way, but yeah, of course that is what we see. But yeah, kind of wondering, does that just mean that's the normal way how it goes? Because I mean, if we then look at adults, there are also all sorts of different people. Sometimes you think, wow, there are horrendous circumstances and they look very alive. They look very sort of in touch with them. And others, you feel like, oh, they had everything, but they look very kind of depressed or very down. So how is the dealing with energy and giving up your energy, or how does that work? What would you think?
Well, there are so many emotional dynamics that come into play. So, and of course, if somebody's just scraping by and barely has enough food to eat, that's one situation. But you can be born into luxury, and if your emotional needs are not tended to, that the fact that you're fed and housed and all of those things are important, but they don't feed a person's soul. They don't touch what's really needed for that child or that person to really thrive. And when there's really a lack of connection or abuse or neglect or the various kinds of things that we see, the child by definition shuts down. That's the way that shutting down is one of the ways of coping. And one of the things that I did in developing the NARM model is I looked at, many other models that I had studied, exposed myself to, explored personally, all of these things. I saw that one of the things that was alluded to but wasn't talked about so much was the theme of connection. And the theme of disconnection, and like all of the traditional so-called defense mechanisms I saw as I was, when I was developing NARM and writing the first book, that they all revolved around disconnection. Whatever the traditional defense mechanism was, they were always ways of disconnecting. That's the way we deal with difficulties as human beings. We disconnect. We disconnect from our bodies. We disconnect from our emotions. In the process, our sense of self gets distorted. So, and it's one of the pieces that I emphasize in NARM is that it isn't so much the trauma that we experience, not that that's irrelevant. I don't want people to get the wrong idea, but the adaptations that we made to the trauma or traumas, because when we're talking about developmental trauma, we're often talking about chronicity, chronic kinds of situations that a person experiences. And I think the important thing in all of that is that the very same mechanisms, adaptive mechanisms that once saved our lives, or made them bearable, at least helped us get through, those same mechanisms are now as adults limiting. So if we grew up in an abusive family, we learn to shut down our emotions. But then when we grow up and we're out of touch with our emotions for human beings are central. If we don't know what we're feeling, if we can't feel our bodies, if we can't feel the aliveness that's connected to being or associated with being connected, to body and emotions, then life starts to feel empty. And if we're not connected to ourselves, how can we connect to other people? So we get these ongoing dynamics that they're part of the human condition. But they are elements that can be addressed, and they're not permanent. They are things that with working on ourselves and doing the work that we need, that those, continuing to use these old adaptive survival mechanisms that are no longer useful as adults, that we can actually move beyond that. And I think, you've experienced that yourself and seen other people go through that themselves, that things do change, that it's one of the things that keeps me optimistic. Even, when we look at the human condition, there's a lot that's upsetting and difficult, and yet human beings are also very resilient and consistent with modern neuroscience. We know that the brain remains plastic for much longer than neuroscientists used to believe. And I see that with people. It's not just their brains, but that human beings are more plastic. There's more capacity for change than we often realize.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I've seen it with myself. I think I had a few areas where I thought, oh, maybe next life, but starting the NARM work and starting the process really helped me, to get back my aliveness more. So, and would it then be fair to say, coming back to the questions, how do we lose our aliveness? It has something to do with shutting off of our emotions.
Yeah, shutting off our emotions and shutting off our bodies. It's like we, in response to difficult situations, we all are familiar with a very basic dynamic. When we're scared, anxious, upset, and can't really feel it, we hold our breaths. That's one very obvious thing that I think everybody's been aware of. We can, even when we're scared in a movie, there's, and then whoever gets saved, then there's this collective sigh of relief in the audience because we've been holding our breath, holding the breath, tensing the body, and even ultimately, when we tense our body over long periods of time, we then at some point go into collapse states in the body. All of these are mechanisms that we use to shut off, shut down, and disconnect.
Yeah.
And that disconnection leaves us adrift. Because like I said, just it's worth repeating though, when we're not connected to ourselves, we can't really be connected to other people, and that's what we most want.
Sorry für die kurze Unterbrechung. Ich bin Lutz Urban, der CERTYCOACH Gründer, und ich möchte dich auf einen kostenlosen Service hinweisen. Dann geht es auch gleich weiter. Wenn dich das Thema Coaching interessiert und du Menschen professionell in Ziel- und Veränderungsprozessen begleiten möchtest, dann schau doch mal in unserem CERTYCOACH Gratis HUB vorbei. Den Link findest du in der Beschreibung. In unserem Gratis Hub dreht sich alles um das Thema professionelles Coaching. Du findest dort Coaching Manuals, White Paper, Interviews mit Coaching-Experten, die dich hinter die Kulissen ihrer täglichen Coaching-Praxis schauen lassen, aber auch alle Informationen rund um das Thema Ausbildung im Zukunftsmarkt Coaching. Sinnvolle Zertifizierungen beleuchten wir und wir laden dich ein zu Deep Dive Webinaren zum Thema. Der Zugang ist kostenlos, den Link findest du in der Beschreibung.
Yeah. That is the connection bit. That's really something that kind of landed with me, like how important it is and what it means. And now we started to talk a little bit about emotions, and I mean, if I look into different fields and areas, and like emotion, I often find is such an interesting topic, and everyone has such a different idea with these strange emotions, as in, like, if you look in sports, then they say, you need more emotion, or in the business world, you need to leave them out. It's a little bit like, it's if you go to the butcher, do you want a little bit more or less, or like what's really emotion? What does that really mean from your perspective?
Well, there's the difference between what we allow ourselves to feel and what we choose to show other people. And that's an important distinction because sometimes people get confused, like they're afraid of their anger because they're afraid that that leads to angry acts. But it's very different to feel the anger that is unresolved, let's say, that we've been carrying, and that there's a lot of charge and energy and aliveness in that. As that gets integrated, as we understand it, as we work with that, it's very reconnecting and very enlivening. So, but that doesn't mean it's that we should be going around, as maybe it was once believed in psychotherapy, that you should go and just, get it all out. That's not the point. We, as grown-up human beings, we have choices, but we want to be able to have the choice of knowing what we're feeling and then finding appropriate ways, useful ways to communicate that. Not just negative emotions, but even positive emotions. A major thing for many people recognize in themselves is that how difficult it is for them to say to the people that they love that they actually love them. So we're talking about not just, anger's being able to feel our anger and be with our anger and understand it and work with it is important, but also tender and vulnerable feelings like love and caring and vulnerability and those kinds of things are also significant for the human experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often experience this kind of, and I mean, you said it yourself, but I know you, so I know how you hold it, this idea of, oh, there are positive and negative ones. So I want all the positive ones, but I don't want the negative ones. It's kind of, I think, yeah, we agree that that's not working. That's not how it works.
No, once we shut down, we pretty much we can't selectively shut down. We try, human beings, some people, but ultimately it's not a useful strategy. So there is in the reentry process, like a reconnection process, some necessity to deal with challenging emotions, but it opens up so many other possibilities of what we call positive emotions. Even that division between positive and negative loses its sense for me at a certain point because at some point the emotions are just a certain kind of energetic state that has and there's a certain charge to it. Its behaviors are different, and that often gets confused with emotions. So there are negative behaviors, there are destructive behaviors, but there are, in my way of viewing things, there aren't destructive emotions. There may be destructive impulses, but when we integrate and are aware of these impulses and understand what they're trying to communicate, and we don't act those impulses out, they're enlivening and enriching to our lives.
So that sounds like it's kind of actually something that, yeah, gets us back our aliveness if we are able to connect to the whole range and array of emotions again.
Yeah, that is part of it. Yeah, and as you know, being as familiar with NARM as you are, that we talk about primary emotions and secondary emotions, for example. So there are many people are caught up in this loop of secondary emotions, which are often the emotions that are easiest for them to feel, and their default emotions. And it's one of the things that I talk about regularly is that default emotions tend to keep us stuck and on the surface. And so all emotions are not created equal. We're looking for emotions that actually support increasing reconnection. Default emotions, if like our default emotion is anger, no matter what we're actually feeling, we get angry, then that doesn't take us into our depth. That doesn't reconnect us. Vice versa, if our default emotion is sadness, as it is for many people, they don't, whatever it is they're actually feeling, they just start to cry. That also keeps us on the surface of ourselves and on the surface of things and doesn't lead to increasing reconnection. But when we understand these various dynamics and how to work with them, it always leads to increasing reconnection, which is satisfying in itself for us as human beings.
Yeah. I mean, I've witnessed it many times. We've seen it many times in our courses. It is very touching. So, and yeah, like if emotions, if they play such an important role, and if like, what is it then that would help us, or what is getting in the way, like we would say in NARM, to reconnect with the emotions, and then also reconnect with the aliveness that is probably still in us? I mean, that's our assumption, I think.
Yeah, generally it's fear. And it's a fear that's coming from what about what I call in our child consciousness. So that we're afraid, for example, that if we communicate that we're upset with somebody who we care about, and somebody who we want to care about us, that we're going to lose that relationship. Well, you've seen many times how when we explore that with somebody, that fear that they're going to be unfriended or leads back to really the childhood fear of the loss of the attachment relationship. So it's when we unpack it, there's all of this baggage that's there, that's from the past or childhood consciousness, that gets in the way of us um, you know dealing with other human beings, adult to adult.
Yeah. So, and I guess like for many people now, automatically the idea or the impulse would come, so okay, so you now need to lie on a couch and talk about what happened, and then this will be gone. I mean, I'm referring here to, of course, like classic psychoanalysis, and um, what would you think, what is it that is really helping, and probably also what is not helping what we are currently doing? Because I mean, we have, I think, so many like good-hearted helping professionals, but I don't know, sometimes I feel like yeah, the outcome sometimes is I guess could be more, could be better.
Well, my particular bias is against weighting the cognitive, putting extra emphasis on the cognitive, working more just strictly top down, like thinking if we change our thinking, we change our emotions, we change it. That may be true sometimes, but it's often not true. That we human beings, I mean, we've all had the experience of somebody's convinced that they're a bad person, and we're trying to convince them that they're not, and it doesn't go anywhere because people don't tend to respond. And I'm not saying that cognitive therapies are that simplistic, but it's like working top down, changing our thinking is not the most effective way to enter this system that has developed. A system, I'm talking about a person now, who grew up in a system and internalized that system. So it is ultimately, a system, but it's really important that we address the emotional and the experiential, and we can't think our way out of things like self-hatred or self-rejection. It just, I've never seen it work.
So what is it then that we need more in working with people, that it is working more?
Well, again, it's experiential.
Hmm.
Like as we start exploring the various fears that we have, and we see that, and as we just start exploring ourself and our relationship to self and our relationship to the world, we see that one of the ways that we tried to adapt to an environment that wasn't fully supportive to us was to turn against the self. And because it's safer for the child to blame themselves than it is for them to blame the parents. They're 100% dependent on their caregivers. And so they need to protect the image of those caregivers. It's actually better to be the bad child, from a child's point of view, to be the bad child of good caregivers, which means there's still the possibility of being loved by them, versus the good child of caregivers who don't have the capacity to love us in the way that we need. So, and from an adult perspective, just saying that cognitively may be helpful. It may be a first step for some people to realize that they've been doing that, but there's more work than just that cognitive insight that is needed to help us really free ourselves from that distorted perspective on ourselves that we developed in adapting to childhood trauma.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Sort of what came up in my mind right now is like all these people I often hear saying, "Oh well, the past is in the past." So how would you respond to that?
Well, the past is in the past, except when we carry it forward in the adaptations that we've made, it's no longer in the past anymore. And it's actually, I agree with the statement. It actually is part of the NARM approach. So but the bridge is in between the past and the present is in the adaptations that we made to the past. They're not in the past anymore. They're with us now. And that's why NARM, as you've experienced, is a here and now approach, in the sense that we work with the person in the moment. We don't do a lot of archaeological expeditions in the past. Again, as you've seen many times, and I've seen so much in my career, is that as we're working with what's going on in the person's life currently, what's unresolved from the past tends to organically emerge. And then we're able to resolve it, come to some kind of emotional completion with whatever is surfacing from the past. And that brings a real experience of completion and moving, into more aliveness, more a sense of being an adult, less distorted sense of ourselves as being bad or unlovable or unworthy or ugly or not smart enough, or all the different baggage that we as human beings carry around. That, again, we're all part of an adaptation.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I've experienced it so many times myself, sort of what happens when it starts, sort of the system starts to reorganize in the present moment, and you feel like, wow, I see the world with different eyes, and I feel different, and I feel much more alive in these moments. So yeah, that is, for me, it was a very, very important thing, like that the here and now and what happens in me right now.
I appreciate you sharing your experience with it, because it is useful for people not just to hear me, but to hear, how the work has impacted you. So
and I mean, I also want to say I was one of these, probably, if you would have asked me like 10 years back, sort of, what do you feel? I would say, what do you mean? Sort of. I think I've just learned through NARM and through the work, sort of like, how can I say this? It's not like I think I still do it sometimes, but feeling is feeling. I can't effort myself into feel something in a way, and that's also a thing I very often experience. Sort of, then kind of okay, I get the idea. I need to feel. So, and then there is all this pressure. I need to get out of my head. You need to feel, and then it's like, okay, yeah, I feel, but sort of that causes a whole sort of different dynamics then, because, I guess it's not so easy to just feel.
Well, not when we've developed all kinds of strategies and what we believe to be valid reasons to avoid feeling. So again, as you mentioned earlier, what we do in NARM is we explore what's scary about feeling. What are the obstacles in the way of feeling? What are the fears? What are the, those elements? Because feeling is the natural human state. Children don't need to learn how to feel. They feel, and they do need to learn over time how to manage their emotions and, those kinds of things. But they don't need to be taught how to feel, because that is part of what we get as part of the package of being human, is a connection to emotions and connection to our body. It's only through these disconnective adaptations that, as I said before, saved our lives at one point, that we learn to stop feeling. I'm sure I've mentioned the original title of my book to you, but it's I think worth mentioning here. This isn't the current title, but originally it was Connection, our deepest desire and greatest fear. And connection only becomes our fear when we've, had no choice but to disconnect in various ways and to various degrees as children, then to reconnect to our emotions, to our bodies, to other people. That's when that becomes frightening to us. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just wondering, because I think it's fair to say we all have some sort of levels and dynamics, and some more intense, some less. So that's also a question I sometimes get. So, okay, so are we now all traumatized? Because that's sometimes in mainstream. Oh, yeah, we're also traumatized. Or
if you look at TikTok, it's a diagnosis of the week,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for me, it hurts a little, because I feel like the whole word, and like trauma, and we talk about trauma sensitive sort of, it's getting really fuzzy. Could you sort of share from your perspective sort of how the spectrum develops, and how you look at it, and when would you say, okay, now this is really clinical? And yeah.
Well, I completely agree with you, Christian, that the word is overused. And it's unfortunate when important words get overused and, watered down, and they're used, I had a bad date and I feel so traumatized. I mean, unless there was something really horrific that happened on the date, but just it wasn't what you wanted. So it gets reduced to everyday experience. And when we're talking about trauma, real trauma, shock trauma or developmental trauma, we're talking about something significant. So, and it was a developmental process and understanding. The first understanding was really about shock trauma. It was in terms of, and we've known about shock trauma for 120 years. In the First World War, in English at least, this was called shell shock. And then other languages had, other terms for that. But there was an awareness that veterans were not the same after they had a significant war experience. Or at least many veterans were not the same after they had a significant war experience. And then after the war in Vietnam and all of these veterans coming home to the US and to other countries as well, that we started seeing the prevalence of this, shell shock, as it was previously called. And that's when people first started using the word trauma. We forget that trauma has not always been such an active part of our vocabulary. Sometimes I'll see a movie that's supposed to be taking place in the 1800s, for example, and they're talking about trauma, and I know that that would not have been the word that they used back then.
Yeah.
But it was a useful word because we started to understand, and that helped us then explore and develop methods and methodologies that could address this kind of shock trauma that people get in a war experience. And then over time, there was a developing understanding. We have the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, and others that really showed how impacted children are, and then as they become adults, by what they call adverse childhood experiences. It was great work. It was a very important step. I was already teaching NARM at the time this work came out, but it was very supportive of the work that I was trying to do at the time, and still do, obviously. So it's an important understanding, and it's still limited because it makes it sound like it's a discrete experience. Because so often it's not a discrete experience. It's a day by day kind of dynamic of, if you're growing up in a family where, let's say, mother and father are beating each other up emotionally or sometimes physically or in various ways, or beating, or abusive towards you, all these dynamics, and you're there, as I say in the trainings, as you undoubtedly heard me say, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. It's like when we think of it that way, that starts helping people understand the impact of developmental trauma, that chronic everyday dynamic. Now, often there are some significant incidences, or maybe a particularly traumatic experience that kind of is emblematic of a much bigger process that we need to address it. And sometimes we're addressing just that, but usually we're addressing the bigger dynamics. So, like that this one incident represents. So it's moving away from the shock trauma idea that it's just a single incident, to a more general understanding that this is more, in terms of when daily life was in various degrees difficult, threatening, unsafe, profoundly unattuned to you, all of the difficulties that human beings struggle with, and children in particular. That's when we're really talking about trauma, not the way the word is, as you said, gotten fuzzy, because it has.
Yeah, yeah. And forgive me if I mix up the sources. I'm not sure if you said it or if I heard Gabor Mate say it. He said, or you are, sorry, he said
It's
something
okay.
that really kind of landed in me, which was something like, and it's often also the things that didn't happen. That was kind of for me like, because yeah, sure. I mean, of course it had an impact that my father wasn't there. Sort of, he didn't do something wrong, but he wasn't there, and it still, of course, had an impact, which then dawned on me. I think, yeah, I kind of on a superficial level, I got that, but then on a deeper level, yeah, of course, it's also things that didn't happen that should have happened in particular phases of our development.
Well, it could have been either of us, because I say that too, and I know Gabor says it. I've gotten to know Gabor over the last years, and we've both been surprised how, coming from very different kinds of backgrounds, we do see many things similarly, and that would be one area that I think either one of us, in maybe slightly different ways, could have said, because it's certainly something that I emphasize as well. Whether you're remembering it from me or him, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, having said that, and looking at these things, so I guess it probably would be fair to say, sort of, we all more or less are somehow impacted by the experiences we had. So, and it's worth sort of looking at these things, because, like, coming back to the question at the beginning, there is so much to gain in a way, if we want to get back to what enlivens us. And I would like to look a little bit at what does that mean if we're trying to support people in this journey. I mean, there are so many self-help books and 7-step, 11-step, or whatever programs, and I think, yeah, a lot of people, they really try hard to come up with things that are helpful. But what would you say, from your years and years and years of experience, what is really essential in helping people and supporting people with these dynamics?
Well, I think, I touched on this earlier, but our distortions, well, let me put it a different way, how our relationship with self gets distorted, and our relationship with other people gets distorted through real childhood or developmental trauma. That is a really important place for people to start. And, one of the things that, as a clinician for so many years, is that just about every client that walked in the door, despite what it might have looked like or they might have looked like on the surface, there was this theme of self-hatred, self-criticism, self-judgment, self-rejection. And as I've said at different points, and I may or may not say this to a client, sometimes I've said this kind of thing. It's like, you weren't born hating yourself. You weren't born rejecting yourself. It's something you learned along the way, and something you've taken on, and so I think that that's very important place to start. Like, we tend to look at symptoms because they're loud and they get our attention, when we're anxious chronically. Of course, that needs to be attended to. But sometimes that anxiety is being driven by all this, anger that we're directing against ourselves that we didn't know how to deal with when we were children, for example. And I think that one of the things that I focus on is that we're not here, as NARM therapists at least, we're not here just to extinguish symptoms. Obviously, symptomatic relief is important to the client, but we want to know and work with what's driving the symptoms themselves. And so it's not just about extinguishing symptoms, which feels overly simplistic to me.
Yeah, yeah. And the first thing that comes up for me, that is curiosity in a way, that is so important. And this whole idea of not knowing, which I find like so helpful, but also is helping me because I don't need to know. That is relaxing me immediately. I can be just curious in an exploration process rather than in telling people what to do. And I mean, my experience is more the coaching field, and I think some people are very proud and I know what to do, so just do these steps and all of that. But I think it's just not working. And would you agree, first of all, like with the curiosity and the not knowing, that's so important?
Well, you've heard me say it so many times, so I know that I do believe it's important. As it's essential, both as just human beings and as clinicians, because one of the feedback that I've gotten so much over the years from clinicians is how much easier it's made their job, that they don't have to figure everything out, that they can be curious and that they can explore with the client. And it's actually more effective than the therapist trying, or the coach, for example, trying to figure out these various kinds of either treatment plans or coaching plans, as opposed to making it a more collaborative process. So whatever helping profession a person is in, making it collaborative changes the power dynamic. It actually empowers the client when you do this as a collaboration, when you don't assume you know what's wrong as the coach or as the therapist or whatever kind of clinician you are, that you really explore and listen to the client. Let them, talk about their own inner world and their relationship to themselves and their relationship to others directly, rather than us trying to fit a treatment plan on somebody that we don't fully know yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably in my experience and in my work with coaches and training them, and I also, of course, experienced in the NARM trainings with you, seems to be very tricky for us helping professionals to let go of the idea, oh, well, I need to be in control and in charge of the process. And there's a lot of pressuring ourselves to get good results. And particular, sometimes at the end of the session, there should be something really worth coming out of it, and all these kind of dynamics. And I really learned so much from you in terms of like this whole efforting and pressuring ourselves. Could you share a little bit sort of what that also does in the dynamic and what it does with us, of course, as helping professionals?
Well, it's hard on both the helping professional and the client, because if the therapist is pressuring themselves for whatever variety of reasons that they develop this particular strategy or this idea that that's going to be helpful, it also creates pressure on the client to come up with results. And it actually, from my point of view, it represents a certain kind of misattunement, where we're missing the client because we're so busy with our own desire to be helpful, which can come from a very good place in us. But when we don't know how to utilize that effectively, then it actually is one of those things that, despite our best intentions, the pressuring itself and being goal-oriented itself, and the loss of being real curiosity that comes with those dynamics, that those become the obstacles in the way of really effective work that we're trying to do with our clients.
Yeah, that's definitely. And I so often hear, like, when I can say sort of what would be if we don't need to come up with something right away, if we just give ourselves a little bit of time, this instant, oh yeah, it's helpful if I don't need to have a goal or whatever for a while. But yeah, it's always interesting to observe how. Yeah, and even in myself, after all these years with NARM training, it sometimes kicks in this like pressuring myself, or trying to make it particularly good or whatever. Unfortunately,
I think
then after I've spent time with you, because then I think, oh, I could do it even better.
Well, one of the things that I think comes up for, helping professionals of all kinds is that how we as human beings relate to the theme of helplessness. Because often the client is struggling with some aspect of helplessness. They've got these difficult symptoms. They don't know how to change. They've tried different therapists, diet techniques, all kind of read lots of books, all these kinds of things. But they haven't been able to get the change that they want. And so the tendency is to double down, put more effort into it, which actually has the opposite impact. It actually slows the process down.
Yeah, sort of pressuring yourself to be more relaxed and be more alive is just often causing the opposite.
Exactly.
I also learned that the hard way with all the ideas of optimizing and sure, I think we all have done that at some point, more or less.
Yeah.
So real connection then is the important antidote in a way, if I would interpret that correctly.
Absolutely. And it relates to the thing we were just talking about too, is because when we're pressuring ourselves as helping professionals, we're not really in connection with our clients. We're in connection with our idea of where the client needs to go, and we're missing them. So we're out of connection. We can even look at that physiologically. When we're efforting, there's an uptick of the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. And when where there's this uptick on that level of the nervous system, the prefrontal cortex is actually going offline. And so the more we pressure ourselves, the less actually less capacity we have for creativity, for real insight, for deeper awareness of dynamics. And it disconnects us from our clients as well. And that's where what you were just talking about, is that authentic connection. We have all kinds of studies over many, many decades now that when it's an important element, in addition to whatever the therapist knows, is who they are as human beings. The more capacity for authentic connection, even though this hasn't been stated so clearly in these studies, but they show that just who the therapist is so important. But for me, it has to do with authenticity, capacity for connection, and all of that. That the more that the therapist actually has that, the greater their odds of being of truly helping the client that they're trying to help are.
Yeah, absolutely. And also makes the process so much more rewarding and simpler in a way. And the other day I was like in a course, and someone said to me, well, now I've learned all these things and I've done all these trainings, and now you're telling me sort of that it's that simple. It's sort of, I should forget all of this and it's about connection, just connection.
Well, I never imply that it's that simple,
Yeah.
because there are lots of obstacles in the way of connection. But it is, as you've seen, a paradigm shift for many people. And I also tell people, you don't have to forget about everything you've learned when you go through this training program, but you might but you can use that in a different way. So instead of interpreting, we can ask educated questions. We're using our understanding and our knowledge, but in a different way, in what I think is a more respectful way to the client. Tell them, excuse me, instead of saying to them, well, I think this is about that, and you should do this, and giving advice and all of those things, we just start asking questions and let them come up with their own answers with our guidance and support. So we don't have to give up or forget about the things that have been helpful and that we've learned, but we can apply them in a context that is, I believe, in my experience, is that it's more conducive to real effective work with the people that we want to help.
Yeah. I think I totally agree. And I just realized where we are with the time. I mean, I can talk for hours with you. That would be a problem. But I also, want to be mindful of your time. And I'm just curious, with all your experience, what would you say? What would you like to probably address what we haven't? What might be helpful, and what might also help people to probably look at these dynamics and things with other eyes, and maybe also I don't know, something that might be I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. I think I would like to hear something from you that kind of sums up all my kind of experience and all the optimism and everything that comes out of this NARM work.
Oh, well, real change is possible.
Yeah.
Just knowing that, and knowing that literally thousands and thousands of people have experienced real change through, all of the people who've trained in NARM, and you are using it in their practice as coaches or as therapists, and some other helping professionals as well. So that real change is possible, not just superficial band-aids, but real significant core shifts in the person. That's a message of real hope, I think, to a lot of people who are struggling and suffering and who've tried a lot of different things. So, and I'm not saying that NARM is the only therapy that can work for everyone, but as you know, it's helped a lot of people. And so a lot of people have found it useful for them, particularly, I think, when it's being used by somebody who really understands the system. It has a high degree of effectiveness. So that's one piece. What else might I say? That's just to sum it up. There's real suffering that we deal with as human beings, the life and death and illness and various kinds of things. I don't need to elaborate, but there is real suffering. But then there's all of this, and I say this very carefully, this self-created suffering that we not necessarily intentionally on our part, but unconsciously often carrying old patterns of survival into our current lives that we don't need to use anymore. And it's this kind of self-created suffering that we can be most effective with, in terms of helping ourselves, helping the people that we work with. And I think the other piece, and we haven't talked about this today, but just to mention it before we stop, is that each of us has more agency, which is difficult word to translate, as we know, into German and other languages sometimes too. Well, most other languages, actually, it's hard. So that it has to do, though, with being able to see our part in whatever emotional or relational difficulty that we're experiencing. And that's not blame. That's not blaming ourselves. It's blaming ourselves is the opposite of agency, but to see, oh yeah, I've been viewing this through a distorted, whatever the situation is, I've been viewing it through a distorted lens. And new lenses, clearer lenses, less distorted lenses of viewing myself in the world are possible. So that would be the message of hope that I would like to give our viewers as we, come to a close here today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, I can just sort of highlight that. I would say I'm a personal example of it. And I've experienced it myself, that, yeah, so much is possible. And it's such a, yeah, valuable and so important work. And I'm really, really, really appreciate from the bottom of my heart that you took the time to um, yeah, have this conversation with me, and I really hope that a lot of people are getting a lot out of it, and I'm sure. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm glad to be here with you today.
Thank you.
Wenn dir das Video genauso viel Freude bereitet hat wie mir und du uns gerne etwas zurückgeben möchtest, dann abonniere den Kanal, aktiviere das Glöckchen und jedes Like hilft uns, dass mehr Menschen mit diesen Themen in Verbindung kommen. Ja, und es zeigt uns an, dass du mehr willst. Kommentiere doch gerne einmal und sage uns, mit wem wir solche Art Gespräche in Zukunft führen sollten. Wen würdest du dir wünschen im CERTYCOACH Podcast und vielleicht auch zu welchen Fragestellungen? Ja, und wenn du liebäugelst mit einer Ausbildung in diesem Zukunftsmarkt Coaching, du dich vielleicht etwas umfangreicher informieren möchtest zu den Möglichkeiten, dann lade ich dich herzlich ein in unseren CERTYCOACH Gratis HUB. Im Gratis HUB findest du alles rund um das Thema professionelles Coaching, Manuals, White Paper, Experteninterviews, Einladungen zu Deep Dive Webinaren, aber auch alle Themen zum Ausbildungsmarkt und zu sinnvollen Zertifizierungen findest du hier gut aufbereitet zu deiner Orientierung. Du findest den Link in der Beschreibung. Dann danke ich für die Aufmerksamkeit und verbleibe mit besten Grüßen, dein Lutz Obern.